Welcome to Better Bedtime Chronicles. You're listening to Nicole
and Bridget. Together we have 15 years experience working directly with families struggling with sleep challenges.
We share stories, advice, and deep dives into all things sleep. Let's go.
Heads up, the sound quality on this episode is like a really crappy Zoom call, so bear with us. We do get better as the next episodes go on.
Hey.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Yay. It's nice to be here together. We had a night out last night.
We did.
Yeah, it was lovely.
We had fun.
It was nice. We went to, if you've never heard of musical bingo, where you play bingo with music.
Yeah.
Yeah, at EDO Kitchen.
It's our favorite thing to do.
It is. It's our nice thing to do. My favorite is it ends
at like 9 o'clock.
Yeah, and we're like home in bed, a good time.
We go out and have a quick party and back home.
It's nice. They're so efficient, right? It's perfect. So that was nice last night.
Yeah, that was really fun.
I'm glad it encourages me to get out of my house.
Yeah, sometimes it's a little hard, right?
It is hard.
Around like 3, 4 o'clock, I'm always like, ugh, why did I make this plan?
Yeah, why did I commit to something?
But then I push through because I know I'm going to have fun if I go, which I always do.
Same. Yeah. It is very nice.
We got to prioritize our own needs sometimes, right, as parents?
Yes, because we get in the routine and then it's just easy to stay home. Me too. Last night I was like, I could just watch.
Yeah.
I already finished watching all of Selling Sunset, but I was like, I've been watching Peaky Blinders. I don't know if you watched that.
I need to get into that.
Yeah, it's spicy so far. So, but I had a much better time out.
Yeah.
That was lovely.
We're rewatching New Girl right now.
Oh.
And so I was like, I could. We're like pretty close to the end of season 6. Like where some exciting things are about to happen. But no, it's really nice to get out and change it up a little bit.
It is, yes. So that was lovely. And we're here today to talk to you about the 4-month sleep regression.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. I feel like we get a call, like inquiries.
People are terrified about this.
They are terrified. Yeah. So you're in the right place because we'll do some real talk about it. And we get like certain age groups, we have an influx of inquiries. And I would put this right up there.
Oh, yeah. Probably the highest.
I would say.
Honestly.
It's 4 months, 9 months, and then somewhere around 18 months.
Yeah.
We tend to get quite a few.
Yeah.
But 4 month or leading up to it. And I think the name 4-month sleep regression is even deceiving for a couple of reasons. But one is it's not always at 4 months.
No. In fact, it's often sooner.
3 months.
Yeah.
It should be called the 3-month sleep regression because it's like
3.5.
Yeah, 3.5. And then something's happening.
And also regression. I hate that word.
Me too. That's the other reason.
Tell me.
Yeah. It's like it's a regret. You're going backwards.
Yeah.
But really, if your baby is going through this leap and having I'm using quotes like you can see me regression, it's actually good for their health and it's good development moving forward in a good direction.
It's a developmental milestone.
A big
one. That
one.
we want to see.
We
would be concerned if we didn't see.
That's true.
Yeah.
And so the hard part is it can show up in a big change in your baby's sleep.
Yeah.
And that's why it gets this terrible name. Yeah. The name is
Tell
deceiving.
me what people see.
So they'll see, so you're again coming out, if you listen to our last episode about newborn sleep, you're coming out of a time where your baby was sleeping frequently, maybe a little bit predictable, at least in how you put them down. They maybe even were starting to do nice long stretches, at least on occasion.
Usually in around 3 months, they start getting like a nice 5-hour chunk at night or even longer. And parents are like, here's the light, it's coming. And then
dun, all of a sudden they go through again, this healthy leap in development that we want to see. But the downside is, you can see harder going down. They don't stay asleep as long, resisting sleep. And that ties in with a number of things. One is they have increased stamina, so they can stay awake a little bit longer. But also the way their sleep is shaped totally changes from the 3rd to 4th month.
That's the thing. So what this developmental milestone is essentially babies begin to have sleep cycles that mirror what adults have. So instead of it being like kind of cattywampus, frankly, like prior to 4 months or 3.5 months, whatever, it becomes remarkably consistent. And they cycle from light sleep to deep sleep back to light sleep again. That's why we're always talking about sleep cycles, right? And I tell you, like most parents, a 6-month-old baby will be able to say exactly how long their kid's sleep cycle is. People will say, they sleep for exactly 38 minutes because it's that consistent. It becomes like a science instead of an art, if you will. So the development of those sleep cycles is key to a healthy sleep and certainly exactly how adults also function, but it does create some complications.
Yeah. All of a sudden we're faced with this baby and maybe they can roll too. There's other things that come along with that. And it can make it really tricky. So we get a huge influx of calls and inquiries looking for help at that age. And the good news is that's an age where we could absolutely do something.
Yeah.
And once your baby hits that 14, 15 week, they're healthy, they're gaining weight. Well, even if they're like, not following their curve perfectly, but you have a plan in place and anything, things are addressed the best they can be, as long as they're that age, you absolutely can start making changes to sleep if you're feeling ready.
Yeah. That transition is really important for the work we do, because prior to that, we don't recommend sleep training. Mm-hmm. It's generally not as effective prior to that, like that leap, that change. Mm-hmm. And once kids have gone through that developmental milestone, all of a sudden sleep becomes predictable, consistent, and like consistent across the board. Like I always say to families, like if you held like 4-6-month-old babies in front of me, I bet I could tell you what they're going to do ish with their sleep, because like, whether their parents follow plans or rules or not, like babies just naturally fall into rhythms,
yes,
right?
They do. Yeah.
And that's where, what we can lean on as people who are trying to give advice to our clients.
Yeah. Because there's certain things that are in common amongst an age group, like how long-ish they could stay awake for, like how many feedings-ish are we looking to see in the night, or what's normal or not. So it brings up this new exciting chapter of they have this ability to sleep longer, their tummy can hold more milk. It's all an exciting time. So I don't know about you, but when I get a call from someone who's in the pits with this, they're really struggling, I'll often say if it's only been a couple days, but they could be just going through a leap, and you might not even need sleep training by the time they go through the sleep within a week or so, or 2 weeks. So I'm not fast to do something the minute they have the first rough night.
For sure.
But if it's been like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, as some of this happens, and you'll get preschool clients on the phone, talk to the parents, and it all began at 4 months, right? Or whatever it started.
Always.
And it just never resolved. So it's an exciting time in our work, because yes, there is a lot you can do.
Yeah, we can offer support in more consistent and helpful way than we could with a newborn.
Yeah, with newborns, it's really like, here's what safe sleep looks like. Here's what we can do to make sure they're not getting overtired and make sure we have their nights and days separated, all of those things. But the 4 month is a really exciting time, because you can start to treat sleep the same way, like put baby down the same way. So they're used to like awake and aware in their sleep space, so that they're used to drifting to sleep on their own. And the hope is that if they do have that 38 minute sleep cycle or 27 minute, everyone knows it down to the minute. They eventually, when they wake up after that one sleep cycle, will look around their space and fall back asleep without such intervention from you when you kind of play your cards right.
Yeah. So you're touching on the thing that happens. The thing is this: babies struggle to connect their sleep cycles, right? Prior to that regression, they don't need that support to connect those sleep cycles, or like they're not really cycling. So, but afterward, they often will struggle to fall back asleep when they hit that light period without support from their parent. And then that becomes very tiring occasionally for parents. Some babies can figure this out on their own, but many can't. And that's where sleep training comes in.
It does. Yeah. And as we know, and we've talked about too, there's so many methods and ways to do it out there. And for us, it really boils down to making sure that baby or the child is familiar with how to fall asleep on their own. And that comes down to good timing. So we have good sleep pressure, yes, an effective routine and a safe sleep space, but ultimately, how is that child falling into sleep?
Yeah.
And so most people we see, they're being put to sleep, right? With a soother, with rocking. I feel like a lot feeding, like 60 to 70% feeding to sleep. Of course, you have to feed your baby. Mm-hmm. But then that becomes tricky when they wake up after 38 minutes.
Yeah.
And they're looking for that ticket back to sleep, and that's not within their own control. And that's where the value comes in of like, if they can do it on their own and they do it over and over and over again, that's when you get consolidated stretches.
You got it. And again, like the disclaimer we always like to make, which is like, if you're nursing your baby to sleep and it's working for your family, go for it. Absolutely. Nobody cares.
I would never rock the boat for that.
No, right? If that's working, amazing. But if you're listening to this because you're desperate, because things are, hard, because your baby's waking every 30 minutes, because it's not working, that's when this stuff comes in.
That's a good
right?
point. Yeah. There's many babies who feed or rock to sleep and they sleep beautifully.
And
we don't hear from them.
No, we don't hear from them.
We don't get those calls. But we know it exists. And if that's a good point.
If that's you, all the power to you.
Yeah.
But if it's not you, this is what we'll talk about.
Yeah,
let's talk about it.
The opportunity is always like how they're falling asleep. I feel like even all these years we've been doing it, it's seldom not related to that.
Yeah.
Some will say, and this is true, they'll fall asleep fine in the evening on their own, awake and aware, but it's the night wakings are the problem.
Yeah.
But often
Or
as
naps.
you look, the naps. But if you look, we like to challenge people to say, look at a 24-hour window or a period of time, let's say, and how many times in that 24 hours is the baby getting put to sleep or falling asleep on their own?
Yeah.
And so even if maybe one time in 24 hours they're falling asleep on their own, all these other times they need that ticket to sleep, which then becomes confusing. Do we hold out? What do we do? That sort of thing.
So I think the number one thing about sleep is consistency.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I say to all my clients. We want a consistent routine. We want ideally consistent sleep environment. Of course, flexibility is also important, but especially when we're establishing these norms, consistency is so key. And we want to respond to them in a consistent way. And this goes back to that attachment piece again. So a lot of the time, people worry, again, we talked about that in our attachment episode, people worry about forming a secure attachment with their baby. And a really key part of secure attachment is consistency. Children thrive on consistency because it allows them to feel safe. Mm-hmm. And so if you are some nights putting your baby to sleep by nursing and other nights rocking and some nights leaving them to cry and other nights dancing on your head, that baby doesn't know what's coming. They don't have security in consistency in those moments. Mm-hmm. And you also don't know what's coming. And you also don't have security and consistency. And so a huge part of sleep training is just establishing consistent norms that everybody can come to understand and appreciate. And I promise that increases your baby's safety and security from an attachment lens. So once again, we come back to this. Like, this is very key for secure attachment.
And that's what it's all about, right? That's really our concern, is like making sure we're nurturing the secure attachment.
Yeah.
I mean, having good sleep is great too, but it's nice to know how married together those things are, because you hear about it and think that the opposite could be true, but no.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this, go listen to our attachment episode, because we talk about this at length.
Yes. Yeah. You are so good at explaining it too. It's just such a big deal. And we know that's a driving force for how people choose to treat sleep, how they respond, how they react to it. And sometimes it's coming from maybe not the right information. So hopefully we can help you with that.
So how do we create consistency?
So I like to say, especially the tricky thing with a 4-month-old or a baby coming out of this newborn zone is that we can treat sleep the same, how they sleep, where they sleep, but the timing might not be as consistent yet. So the only thing to be consistent about is following your baby's bend with it. So we love to watch for early tired cues, red rimmed eyes, glazed over eyes, rubbing their eyes, pulling their ears, yawning, staring into space, all these things we kind of keep an eye for.
Yeah.
And so even though that wake window might not be exactly 1.5 hours, right, or 2 hours, whatever it might be, we know that we're following their cues and going baby-led, and that you can still be very consistent while going baby-led.
Yes.
And so what you do then is you see these tired cues, or you ballpark it. You're like, you know what, they've been awake for a good stretch now. I know it's time to wind them down. And you pick a few key things to have as a ritual before sleep.
Yeah, the cues, the sleep cues.
Yeah, and the hope here is that the baby gets used to these items happening A, B, C, D in a row in the same space, and not necessarily by only one person.
Yeah, that's key.
If you have a partner who's home and hands-on, great, they can do it. Or if your mom or whoever is involved in your life, this depends on, as you're listening, what you have around you. And some people don't have much, and this is not to shame that at all. But if you have someone, to have them do the ABCD is really great, so that the baby's sleep is tied to like this ritual before sleep, less to the person. Although, to be honest, they always want their mother, right? Like they always want the one parent. That's at least how it's been in our house.
Certainly, especially if with breastfeeding, like the breastfeeding parent.
Yeah, so you'll find probably your presence is heavy involved with doing these things. But think about it like this: we want to make sure all the needs are met leading up. So we like a cleanup. So if it's a bath night, great. If it's not, even washing their mittens and like their cleaning out their little neck rolls or whatever is great. But starting in the bathroom or in a sink or in a space that you're not usually in during the day. So you do that. We love to incorporate a feeding into the routine as well to make sure we have a full tum. And this is a great time to have fresh bum, get in that sleep sack. And then we love to have a step or two between feeding and hitting the crib.
Yeah.
This can be a story. It can be a song. If you pray, if you whatever, do a yoga stretch, something, whatever you do with your baby. Some people will go around the room saying goodnight to all the photos on the wall. Good night, bunny rabbit. Good night, squirrel, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Just something between the feed and the sleep to just have that bit of a buffer and make sure they're going down, as awake as they can.
So we hit on awake times there for a minute. Tell me this. How long should like a 4-5 month old baby be awake?
Yeah, so that can really change not only as those weeks go by, but even throughout the day. You might notice your baby has a shorter wake window first thing in the morning.
Yeah, that's common.
So likely an hour and a half, I would say, to start. And then as it grows closer to an hour 45 and then up to 2 hours.
Yep.
And with this whole idea of being consistent, yes, but be consistent in just monitoring those tired cues or paying attention to like did they have a terrible crummy nap before, and you know that next wake window is actually going to be shorter.
Yeah.
And by crummy nap, I'm just picturing something like they fell asleep for 5 minutes and perked back up, and that was on the drive home or whatever.
Yeah.
And now you're like, I got another wake window to go, but it's not going to be as long.
Yes.
I think people really hurt themselves and their feelings by trying to achieve a nap schedule, and it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, I failed. I must have done something wrong that wake window. I misread the cue. I did something wrong, but let's take that off your shoulders and say, all we can do is treat sleep this particular way, day over day or nap over nap. And that consistency will come down the line. And so a question we get asked a lot is about nap schedules for this age. And Nicole had mentioned too about this idea that if you take a few 6-month-olds and put them in a room, we have a good idea of what their schedule is going to be like. And that's a beautiful thing about 6 months and up.
Yeah.
But under that, it can be really out of sorts, cattywampus, as we like to say. So it can be shorter naps. You might have a 3-nap day or a 4-nap day followed by, you don't know what you're going to get. So our advice is when you wake up in the morning, I don't know what the day's going to look like, but I do know how I'm going to treat all of that sleep when it does come.
Yeah. And treat each new sleep moment as a new opportunity, right? Like if something went wild the last time, okay, on we go. We don't need to sit in disappointment or stress or frustration. Easier said than done sometimes, but we don't. Like, this too shall pass, our new favorite thing to say.
It is true, yes.
Because it will, right? And, between 4 and 6 months, a lot of sleep consistency does develop. We do tend to move towards more consistently length naps, which allows for like a nice 3-nap schedule to emerge. But it's very normal for babies to have 4, even 5 naps at 4 months old.
It's true.
What we're really looking for is just that they're getting down in an appropriate awake time. One thing I sometimes recommend to families, which I'll recommend here, is the Huckleberry app. It came out sometime between when my kids were born. I didn't actually use it for mine, but I often find that when a family comes to me and they've used the Huckleberry app, they're kind of set up for success a little bit better than a family who hasn't used it, if they're the kind of family that likes to track. So, of course, I don't want to recommend this to families who are like more laissez-faire and don't feel like they need a tracker, then don't use one, whatever. But if you're a family who's looking for one, I really do like that app because they offer what's called like a sweet spot, which is essentially like the ideal awake time. And if you follow those at the beginning while you're trying to learn and understand what your baby's awake times are, that can be a really helpful thing.
That's a great app.
I love
it
that
wasn't
app.
out when my kids were that young, but I have clients now too who will say, instead of using our sleep tracker, can we continue on our Huckleberry and you log in and can see? It's really, the visuals are great.
Good.
It gives you good cues. Yeah, it's a good one for sure. Because it is really all about that. And this idea that we can't force our kids to sleep, or we can't prevent all wakings or how long a nap's going to be. We don't know, but all you get to control is what you do.
What you do about it
next.
Yeah.
The timing, the response.
Another thing I think that's helpful to know around this age is there is going to be a difference between the ideal awake time for a baby who is rocked to sleep or nursed to sleep versus a baby who's falling asleep independently. So often when families come to work with us, they are rocking or nursing or, supporting their child to sleep. And they're waiting a little later in the awake time to begin that process, because you can imagine, say you're starting rocking and all of a sudden you're rocking for half an hour because it wasn't the ideal time, your baby wasn't tired enough yet. That's annoying. That's frustrating. So parents are waiting till babe's like quite sleepy before they begin, right? Perfect. Makes a lot of sense. However, if you're trying to get to a place where you're putting your baby down awake, it's actually better to jump that back 5 or 10 minutes, because we want that baby going in the crib alert and happy kind of just before they start to get tired. If they're crying, whining, red eyes, rubbing their eyes, they're a little far into like the tired thing to have like great success falling asleep on their own. But if they're a little bit earlier, then they tend to, be better prepared, I guess, to fall asleep independently. So you might notice that when you begin sleep training and when you begin putting your baby down awake, their awake time shortened temporarily by 5 or 10 minutes because of that, because you're no longer rocking them to sleep. So that's an interesting point.
That is a good point too, because it can seem that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, you can
It's
feel like it's going backwards, but it's not.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that can be a hard sell too, especially when someone is dead set on, I know if this baby goes to
Yeah.
sleep before 7:30, because in their experience, it's been a nightmare.
Yes.
So we have to really work overtime and be like, well, actually, the
Mhm.
opposite could happen too, where you go earlier and they instead have a beautiful night.
Yeah.
But that can be really hard. Sleep's so coveted, right?
Let's talk about bedtime. You're bringing up an important part. Like
Mhm.
90% of the time I work with a family of this age, I always tell them to move bedtime earlier.
Yeah. Same.
Inevitably, it's later than I would love it.
Yes.
You want to talk about that?
I will, yeah. So this whole spirit of following babies bend, and the beauty of that is you will get consistent schedules out of that, but in the
Yeah.
heat of the moment, it won't feel that way. So I like to say, especially for 4-month-olds and 5-month-olds as well, is that bedtime should fall anywhere between 6 and 8 p.m.,
Mhm.
depending on cues, yes, but also when did their last nap end? Did they
Mhm.
have swim that afternoon and they're dead tired?
Yeah.
Those sorts of things. We want to be making sure we're catching them in that sweet spot. And so that's a huge gap, 6 to 8 p.m. Like,
Yeah.
what is the time? And this is why we're really, clear with clients too, to say, it's not about that right now. It's about following their
Yeah.
cues to make sure we get them at the right time. And as even a few days go by, you start to find that sweet
Yeah,
spot. I
yeah.
know that they're a 2-hour girl, let's say, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It
It establishes quickly.
It's very quickly. So
Yeah.
we're talking a lot about like the very beginning of introducing changes and how to be this way. But as time goes on, that starts to morph as well. And so yes, we want to keep a ballparkish time frame in mind, but it's more about that ritual before bed and then how you're putting that baby down to bed.
Yeah.
And maybe there's other factors in your house too. Maybe you don't even get home from
sure.
work until X o'clock, or the toddler has this class to go to.
Yeah.
Or if your baby has something like physiotherapy they need, or they're having time out of their boot. My client yesterday was they're wearing the hip dysplasia boot, so that's time we have to incorporate as well,
Right.
to make sure. And whatever you can, especially if it's part of your normal routine, whatever we can build into routine to check off your list,
Yeah.
is just one less thing to do. Maybe they have a medicine they have to take, whatever, incorporate it into that routine so you can check everything off. But all this to say, the bedtime should be somewhere in that window, depending on how their day looked. And the nice thing too is, as the months go by and weeks go by, it pretty much does get to be almost set in stone.
Oh, yeah.
For like years, it feels
For
like.
sure. Honestly, I still even put my older kids to bed like around 7, and they hang out in their rooms quietly and like read or, listen to stories or whatever. But yeah.
But it's nice time
that
for them
hangs
too.
around.
When it
Yeah.
evolves into older kids, like that quiet time, that's
really
a big
valuable.
deal. Yeah.
Let's talk about night feeds. That's inevitably a question we get.
We do. It's like, can I sleep train but still feed my baby in the night? How do I sleep train but still nourish my baby at night?
Yeah. And we're huge for that. Like when I begin work with families, I always say, let's keep feeding exactly as you're feeding now. And I do encourage that. So yeah, it's normal at 4 months. Honestly, babies might still be eating every, 2 to 3 hours like a newborn. That wouldn't be unheard of. We do like to see like chunks expanding. We want that time to pass. Maybe they're getting closer to 5 or 6 hours before their first feed. And certainly, like with sleep training, we often see that babies do go a little bit longer before they need to eat, because sometimes they're eating for comfort and sometimes they're eating for calories. And so if we remove the need to eat for comfort because they have that capacity to soothe themselves and care for themselves that way, then we just see them when they need to eat, and that works out pretty nicely. But yeah, it's not unheard of to have regular night feedings at 4 months old. So if that's happening for you and your family, do not stress about it. It's not a big deal. Babies are remarkably good at taking the feeds they need when they need them. And if the baby does cut their own feed, say they skip their 10 o'clock feed and then they go on with their day, they're going to adjust those calories to another feed throughout the day. So they're not losing calories when they drop night feeds. They're just redistributing them through other feeds. So that's a key point. And the same is true for bottle-fed babies, right? We just have to make sure that those ounces get somewhere else in their day, regardless of like whether they're eating 4 times a night, 3 times a night, or 1 time a night.
I like that. I think that's a good point too, is that and they tend to stretch themselves out, especially when they know how to fall asleep without so much help from you. And it can be something like 5 hours between feedings at times. But we're reluctant to push a 4-month-old to no feeds unless they're doing that mostly on their own.
Yeah.
Most of the clients I have right now that are in that age group are eating at least 1 time a night.
For sure.
More
Often
likely twice.
Yeah.
And so that could bring in the question too, though, is, well, when? How do I know if it's a feeding or not? And so we love it. We're fans of thresholds. So we'd say, it's X o'clock at night. I'm going to give an example of 11 p.m. and 3 a.m.
Yeah.
To say if they wake before that time, you would respond in a different way. So maybe you're giving them a few minutes to settle. Maybe you're going in and offering some comfort or a hand on the chest for a moment. But ultimately, having them fall asleep, this is again in the spirit of sleep training, having them fall asleep without that feed so that when they do wake and it's now after that threshold, we know they're actually hungry. But this brings up another point too that I just dealt with this with a client earlier this month, was about making sure they're getting the calories they are getting. Like, because how do you know? How do you know if they are? And this was a baby who had been weaning down. We were actually down to, I think, 1 feeding at this time. All of a sudden, she's feeding several times a night. And we're like, what is going on? So we recommended an appointment with the lactation consultant. This client already had a visit with one before we worked together. And come to find out, there was an issue with milk supply. So that was genuine hunger because of the feedings not happening right. So she ended up getting really good advice from the LC about how to, because the baby was doing snack and snoozy. So she was not taking good full feed. So she had that advice. We did a pause on any threshold so she could get that milk supply back to where it should be. And then off we go, and we're back into it. And she just actually wrote me this morning that the baby slept through the night. And she's like, do we do none now? But I'm like, we'll keep the option for the wee hours of the morning just as we adjust. But so sometimes, like, we can have all our ducks in a row with sleep and all of these pieces. But if there is something outside of it, and sometimes I've seen another one with bottle-fed babies where the nipple's not increased as the baby grows. Well, now they're working overtime, getting milk out of this tiny little nip. And that could be a factor as well.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, it's good to read your baby's cues that way too. Like, if, for example, when babies are sick, like, we always recommend, like, throw all the rules out the window, nurse them as much as you need to. Like, there's lots of scenarios where babies will require more milk, and they'll tell you.
They will tell you. You will know. You will definitely know. And so you got to give credit to this mom or any of us too, to say something's not right. Like, I can tell there's something different. And it was just the slightest hint of it. It wasn't like we were for sure that it could have been this. But it's nice to rule it out to see, because we want, especially when you're getting out of that newborn phase and they have the capacity to sleep longer and hold more milk, we want to make sure that's as good as it can be, so that then we just focus on sleep.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to bring up another question lots of people often ask, which is about the bassinet, the crib. When do we do that transition? Many families begin with their baby sleeping in a bassinet and then want to transition to a crib at some point. Baby gets too big for the bassinet. How do we handle that? So I always start by saying, of course, the Pediatric Association is recommending babies sleep in room with parent until age 1. Frankly, that's almost never happening. It's fine if it is. Again, you do you. But lots of our families transition around age 4 months because baby grows out of the bassinet and there isn't room in their room for a crib. And that's fine. Also, there's value in being in separate spaces, because often, like, babies are very noisy when they sleep. They're very grunty, and that is disruptive to the parent's sleep. So I have talked to families who are like, I can't sleep with this baby in this room. It's driving me nuts. I need a little bit more space so that I can sleep. And of course, your baby will let you know when they need you. You'll hear them. So up to your, like, do whatever is right for your family. Like, I always say that to families, it doesn't matter. You don't have to sleep train in a separate room. You certainly can maintain a baby in your room if you want to. But it is very normal and common for families to transition their baby out of the room around this stage into a crib. Basically, you want to move your baby out of the bassinet when they're A, too big, B, rolling or sitting up too much so that they're not safe in the bassinet anymore. Usually bassinets are not deep enough to allow for a baby who can sit or pull to sit. So certainly if that's happening, get them out of there. But yeah.
I like that. And also a good time of day to do a transition, any transition, whether it's room, there's the space they're sleeping in, is to do it at bedtime in the evening.
Always start at bedtime with everything.
Always sleep training, any changes, new person putting down to bed, whatever, bedtime. When sleep pressure is good and high, it's a great time to do it.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So what can we expect next? We're getting out of this 4 or 5 month haze. What's coming?
Yeah. So when you're in the heat of it, as we've said, we're love a baby led. We're treating sleep the same way all around. But what you can expect is very exciting in the coming months is that the sleep's going to start consolidating. So you're looking for nice long stretches, even though you might hear your baby stir in the night or have a waking, because we all do that on occasion. Yeah. You can be hopeful that they can find their way back as long as you have your ducks in a row there and nothing preventing them from going back to sleep, right? So you're giving them all the tools they need.
Mhm.
You can also expect soon to have a more consistent nap schedule. You'll likely find 3 naps somewhere around 8:30ish, somewhere around noon, somewhere around 3:30, just in
Yeah.
that ballpark, again, depending on morning wake time. And how their stamina is going. But you can expect a good 3 nap schedule, and that'll feel great. And then all of a sudden, you get close to 6 months, and you're going to notice that they'll start resisting one of those naps. And we'll be covering that in our next episode.
Yeah, we'll head into the 2 nap schedule.
Yeah, awesome.
All right. Well, thanks. Thanks for listening. Just remember, this shit is hard, but you are killing it.
To stay in touch, you can find us at betterbedtime.ca.